So now I'd like to welcome Chandra and Ken Harvey. A little bit about Chandra. He is the founder, CEO, and CTO for MLM Biologics. He has more than 20 years of translational research experience spanning academia and industry. His research work focused on immunology, infectious diseases, and tissue and organ transplant regeneration. So please join me in welcoming Chandra as he tells us about MLM Biologics.
Thank you, Lee. Can you guys hear me? All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Lee, for both your kind introduction and the invitation to come talk here. I suppose a special thanks to Mary as well, though, as I believe that the BDI is the sponsor for the luncheon today, though. So I'm Chandra, and Lee already talked about Ken Harvey, my partner in crime. We are founders of MLM Biologics, and I'm definitely pleased to share our story here today with you. Before I get started, we've always gone through this issue. So MLM, we are not a multi-level marketing company. We are a medical device company. And we focus basically on the philosophy of making a better quality product for a lower acquisition price so that it can help a lot of people around the world. And therein lies the MLM philosophy. So who are we? We are a privately held company. We are about 3 years old. And the company focuses on biologic solutions for human clinical conditions affecting the musculoskeletal system, tendon, ligament, bones, and skin, the advanced wound care portion, part of it, though. Our initial entry is going to be in the advanced wound care market. The advanced wound care market broadly can be divided into acute wounds, which are things that you get following surgery, trauma, things along those lines, burns, chemical and thermal burns, and chronic wounds, where I'm going to spend a little bit of time later on, which usually happens in individuals who have some level of an underlying physiological problem, either with their circulation or otherwise, though. And so that's the marketplace where MLM is going to have its initial play. The advanced wound care market, just a quick snapshot, is a $15 billion market globally in the space where we have a play last year, and expected to grow to about $20 billion by the end of the decade. And our team, while small in number, is a very experienced team. We have about a collective 100 years worth of experience in the medical device industry that spans all of the key disciplines of any business entity: R&D, RAQA, manufacturing, sales, marketing, legal, and clinical. So that's MLM Biologics. And where are we? Thanks to Patty, Mary, MLM Biologics, we are about 3 years old, and for the entirety of our journey, we have been housed inside the Sid Martin Biotechnology Incubator in Alachua, and where we have dedicated space both for R&D as well as for manufacturing. And this is the space where MLM Biologics developed our in-house technology, which I'm going to be sharing with you as it applies to the chronic wound care space. So that's a quick picture of what our clean rooms were looking like as we got started with it. I'm hoping all of you folks had your lunch, because some of the pictures that I'm going to show going forward are probably not a good idea if you're still eating. And so having said that, I'm going to move on to our initial target market, which is chronic wounds. Chronic wounds, by definition, are wounds that will not heal without medical intervention. And some of the classic examples of chronic wounds are venous ulcers, diabetic ulcers, pressure ulcers, bed sores, vasculitic ulcers. So these wounds generally will not heal for a period of up to 6 weeks and then become qualified as a chronic wound and will require medical intervention for them to continue to go healing. In instances where healing does not happen, as in the case down below over here, which is a diabetic foot ulcer, oftentimes limb amputation is the only outcome. And clearly, these wounds generally have a very high socioeconomic impact with regards to how patients have to be cared for as wound healing progression goes on. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time justifying why MLM Biologics decided to stick with the chronic wound market as our initial focus as we enter into the market space of the advanced wound care realm. some relevant sort of numbers as a means to kind of give you the impact of what chronic wound care means. I've listed a number of chronic wounds. If you just take diabetic wounds as one of the examples, here is sort of a snapshot of what it costs the US by way of dollars going forward. Roughly about 8 to 10% of the population in the US have diabetes. And as of 2010, we had about 1 million of those having diabetic foot ulcers that did not heal, that required prolonged care. And a care for a diabetic ulcer is generally about 5 to 6 times higher than what it would cost to care for a standard diabetic, meaning it adds an incremental cost to the overall care of this individual. And about 15 years ago, Medicare was billed over $1 billion just for the care of diabetic foot ulcers. So that's how high the economic impact was in a developed country like us. If you break down as to why it's such a high cost sort of a Medicare medical condition, it breaks down to something like this. The average cost for somebody who has a foot ulcer that doesn't heal costs about $20 a day just to manage them. And you go through a variety of treatments, and I'm going to offer one that MLM Biologics offers. The cost of a failed treatment is usually between $17,000 and $20,000. I'm talking about 2012 numbers over here. And as I said before, these instances where the wounds don't heal and they go on for an amputation, it costs about $75,000. So that's sort of the gravity of how diabetic foot ulcers alone cost. And the CDC tells, and the numbers still hold good today though, so between 0.4 to 0.6%, meaning 4 to 6 people out of 1,000 who have diabetic ulcers in the United States go through an amputation process as a means because they haven't healed. And the amputation numbers start to get incrementally higher as you start to go towards the developing and the underdeveloped countries, where it can reach up to 60 to 70%, meaning that if somebody has a diabetic foot ulcer, there is better than a 1 in 2 chance that he or she is going to have their foot amputated. And that's the market that we want to concentrate on, and for reasons I'll show you why. And the statistics also say that if somebody has had a foot amputation, within the next 2 to 3 years, they're going to have a foot amputated on the other leg as well. And those who have had double amputations generally have a lifespan of less than 2 to 3 years. So that's sort of the gravity of how diabetic foot ulcers affect people worldwide. So what can one do to get a diabetic ulcer to heal? So what science has taught us over the last 50 years collectively is that there are 3 components that are required for any tissue to heal. You need an appropriate scaffold, which kind of fills the area where you have a void. You need the appropriate cells to come in there. Cells can come either from your own body, or you can actually inject stem cells into some person. They reside in the scaffold, and they respond to small molecules, things called growth factors, signal proteins, and they start to rebuild the tissue. So the coordinated play of all 3 of them are critical for any wound to heal, and it's no different in wound care. To that extent, there are lots of companies in the US, around the world today, that make products that fit into each one of these categories. MLM Biologics will fit into the scaffold category, which I consider as the key cog when it comes to healing, especially chronic wounds, and I'll tell you why shortly. So as of 2012, when I was doing a sort of a review for the Society for Wound Care, there were close to 100 products that were already in the marketplace, that are already in use, and those that are in late stage development that are going through some version of clinical studies. With about 100 products, have chronic wound healing outcomes gotten any better over the last 5 years? Sadly, the answer is no. So this is a quick snapshot of data that was published out of Johns Hopkins that came out about a month ago. All this does is, again, it looks at a very narrow spectrum. I'm just talking about diabetic ulcers over here, and they just looked at people who had to have intensive inpatient care because of an unhealed ulcer, and it was a small cohort of patients, about 300,000 patients, and they followed them over a period of 5 years. And what they find is the costs are incrementally increasing year over year. It reached somewhere in the neighborhoods of about $750 million for this patient population by 2010. Why are the costs still increasing if you had more than 70 or 80 different options that are available to treat diabetic foot ulcers? The reason that the authors alluded to at the end of the paper was there were several factors that were attributing to why the costs were constantly increasing. One was patients were spending longer periods of time within the hospital, that they weren't healing, which required prolonged intensive inpatient care. Secondly, a lot of the patients were simply not responding to the treatments that were offered to them, meaning multiple treatment options have to be tried out before they would heal. And lastly, amputations are slowly and steadily increasing. General amputations are divided into sort of minor and major amputation. A major amputation is considered as a below knee amputation for those who don't heal. A minor is where you basically start out with around the areas where you have the ulcer and move up. The minor amputation numbers are starting to go up. So if you look back and then see what are the general reasons for these failures, or what are the limitations of the existing product, which is kind of the basis as to why we started MLM Biologics, it basically gets down to sort of these 4 reasons. So the example that I have down here is somebody who has had a diabetic foot ulcer, who basically has lost all of his toes. And he has had a product that probably cost in the neighborhood of about $25,000, and in about 2 to 3 weeks time you can see what the product is doing, basically nothing. So the bottom line is generally multiple applications are needed. Most of these products do not perform in the presence of an infection, and the market has moved towards where clinicians are looking at combining various treatment modalities in order to achieve an effective treatment. And a lot of the products in the marketplace were not addressing this effectively. If you take a step back and then say, why so? It's because out of the 70-odd products that are in the marketplace today, most of them are products that were developed with a healthy individual in mind, where a wound would heal with very little intervention. So a chronic wound is very different from an acute wound in the sense that the physiology of the wound bed itself is different, and you need to do something a little special other than saying that I have a scaffold or I have cells, make this thing work. That basically became sort of the underlying issue. The focus was not on developing a product that would work in the setting where you wanted, but rather having a product which may not work, we'll just try to brute force it the way. So all this basically ends up at a very high average cost for very, very low standard of care for the patients. So that's where MLM Biologics focused, and we decided that we will approach this from the perspective of figure out from evidence that's out there what is necessarily lacking in the context of a chronic wound. How best can you come up with a product that addresses these deficiencies? And oftentimes science also tells us that if you're looking at a product that works in the absolute worst case scenario, it's only reasonable to assume that in acute wounds and burns, etc., things that heal with not as much intervention required as for chronic wounds would work as well, though. And that's what MLM Biologics started to do. And this is going to be the story of BioConnect Wound Matrix. And this is the culmination of about 3 years of our stay at the Sid Martin Biotechnology Incubator. What we did over the course of the 3 years, if I want to snapshot it in about 2 minutes, is the first year and a half, we spent essentially optimizing the technology that would make a product work well in the context of a chronic wound. And we spent the next year going through the appropriate regulatory process in order for our product to be cleared. And now we are sort of in the commercialization phase. So, and I'll go through the story of how we went through the process. BioConnect Wound Matrix is our first flagship product, which MLM Biologics trademarked about a couple of years ago. Is that right, Ken? So, and just a brief technical summary of what our product is. Our product is made from purified collagen. Type 1 collagen is one of the most commonly available proteins that is present in all of us. And it's also very conserved across different animal species, which allows us to take collagen from animal sources and make them compatible to be used into humans. Points 2 and 3 that I have here are the ones, technologies, resulted from technologies that MLM Biologics developed in-house, which is we modified this collagen so that it actually works effectively in the context of a chronic wound, and made it biocompatible to a point where the patient readily accepts and it remodels. And the key things, if you go back to the deficiencies that I had listed, we basically took all 4 of those deficiencies and added on a few additional features that would make it easier for use, both by the end user, for storage, handling, and that sort of became the focus of what went into our engineering methodologies in coming up with the BioConnect Wound Matrix. And The slide that I have here, I promise you, is going to be the only data slide that I'm going to show. I have to show it simply because what I have here is the result of about 2.5 years worth of our product development work. And basically, the data in this particular slide addresses at least 3 of the 4 deficiencies that I listed a couple of slides ago. What it does is where we made the product and we tested the product in the challenging environment of a chronic wound, but used a benchtop model to address that so that you can actually have metrics in analyzing the data back, and saw what would take for the product to stay in the context of a wound bed, and obviously did comparisons with some of the competitive products in the market space. Suffice it to say that with BioConnect, what we were able to do was essentially modify the product to be able to survive and perform in the context of a chronic wound. And we liked the efficiency by which this test was able to extrapolate what was going to happen preclinically and clinically, that we use this test as sort of a standard quality control release criteria these days as well, though. The competitor A and competitor B that are out there, competitor A was one that I was involved with in developing about 10 years ago as well, though. The key difference is going down the road becomes how much does it cost for somebody to come up with a product. The way we have engineered our manufacturing setup and the high throughput process, which I'll show you a brief glimpse of as well, though, will make our product very affordable, which becomes an absolutely important criteria, especially if you're starting to look at the product helping worldwide patients, especially in developing and underdeveloped countries. So this is sort of a quick summary of what it entails for a clinician to basically get the product. It's a dry product, it's a sterile product, it's stored at room temperature, which makes it easy for somebody to carry it anywhere. And once it's out of the package, all it takes is about a couple of minutes worth of rehydration, which a clinician can do in any choice of physiological fluid that he or she is interested in, and the product is ready to be used. You apply it onto the wound, and the clinician only changes secondary dressings after that, meaning the gauze that goes on it. The product stays in the context of the wound and allows the wound to heal. And does it actually do the job? That was the next thing that we went ahead and then tested. So once we had the technology optimized to a point where we were getting reliable benchtop data, we went ahead and started to subject our material to a series of testing. If I want to backtrack for about 2 slides back, as we started the process, MLM knew that the product that we were developing was going to be a regulated medical device, meaning that the product will have to be cleared by either the FDA within the United States or the notified body outside the United States in the European Union for us to have a market cleared product. And so we've been in communication with them as we were going through our product development process, to a point where we got sufficient advice with regards to what sort of tests, what sort of studies we were required to perform, validate, and pass in order for us to actually clear the hurdle from the regulatory bodies. And the list that I have here is sort of a snapshot of some of the key things that were advised by the regulatory bodies we had to successfully complete in order for us to have a successful application for BioConnect with those regulatory bodies. So this basically would come within the year 2 of the journey of MLM Biologics, where most of these studies are done by independent third-party GLP labs, where we send them the products that we have produced, along with requisite competitive products if a test would require that. They perform the test using some regulated standard ISO standards, and they reply or respond back to us with the results saying that either we passed or we did not pass. So obviously BioConnect was able to pass all of the requisite biocompatibility tests. The stability and the shelf life testing soon followed thereafter. With the confidence that we had on what our product was doing in sort of these safety studies, we took the next step to go ahead and then test it in a preclinical setting. To do a preclinical setting, we did it in essentially the more challenging environment, where we created full thickness wounds on pigs and employed either the BioConnect or a competitive product on top of the wounds to figure out how well the wounds would heal, and if there were going to be any differences that we could see on how well BioConnect performed. And the model again that we used was a model that has been published. So there was references that you could go back to and assess on the performance of our product with published data. And again, these studies were also done in independent third-party facilities. A quick summary of what we did or what we saw was the fact that the BioConnect product was able to effectively achieve closure of the wound in a relatively short period of time. About 30 days we were able to see both visually the wounds closing, as well as if you ended up taking micro sections of it and looking under a microscope, we were able to see histological evidence of complete wound closure. If I want to summarize it in one line, what we were able to see was qualitatively and quantitatively, the responses that we saw with BioConnect was as good or better than all of the data that was published in the paper, which included some of the more expensive and market leaders in the market today in the United States. So we got our biocompatibility test done, we got our packaging, stability, sterility data done, we got success with our preclinical data. We put together our bundle and then submitted the information to the FDA. I think near to almost a date last year was when we actually submitted the data to the FDA. And given the data that we had very little pushback from the FDA. So by July of last year, we got a regulatory clearance to market the product. And we were lucky in the fact that the FDA basically bought into every one of the indications that we requested, where our product would be effectively used, and agreed that the product would be effective for use in all of those indications. So we got the clearance in July of last year. And about a month or so before we were getting our regulatory clearance, we decided to take the next step, which was setting up our manufacturing space. Again, thanks to the folks at the BDI, we were able to move into a slightly larger facility within the BDI itself and set up our clean room. And the scheme that I have here basically just gives you sort of a summary of what the process entails, going from raw material coming into our doors into final product that goes out. This entire process takes somewhere in the neighborhoods of about 7 to 10 days, the 10 days being the sterilization, where we send the product out, being the longest lead time. The processes that we control in-house are relatively short, which we can accomplish in a period of about 48 to 72 hours. So we had our manufacturing facility set up, our clean room commission, and we did the requisite validation studies to make sure that we were able to make a product reproducibly using the protocol that we have come up with for our manufacturing, and validated the process and started beginning commercial production about October of last year. Since at this point we had gone through basically most of the steps that was required for us to get our ISO certification, we also took the opportunity to bring in a third party to audit our facilities and our quality systems, and we were able to get our ISO certification by the end of last year as well. Though the ISO certification becomes a critical issue, especially for marketing our product outside the US, where it's considered as one of the key validated steps to justify the quality of the product that a company manufactures. So we got our ISO certification, we were manufacturing clinical grade products, now getting to the commercial aspect of it, and I'm going to spend the next few slides on what we have done commercially since. We initially started to do a soft launch. With the soft launch, what we did was we picked key opinion leaders, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, and essentially decided to try our product out in a controlled setting to see how well the product worked. We used a variety of different conditions, basically combining all of the indications that we had requested the FDA to clear for our product to be used. And most of these cases where our product was used during the soft launch phase were cases where the patients had been unresponsive to traditional standard of care, oftentimes for close to 2 to 3 years, and were either in very expensive long-term inpatient care or were probably looking at potential amputation. Those were the sort of salvage cases, if you want to call it that, where our products were initially tried. And we started to get feedback from, and we started this by late October, beginning of November of last year. And the one advantage with a lot of wound care products is the effects of whether a product works or not is fairly easy to assess, meaning a clinician is going to go back and see, the patient themselves are going to see whether the wound is healing. And so it becomes for a fairly easy follow-up to go through the process of whether the product is clinically effective or not. And This is one example of what we started to get by about the January-February timeframe. I'll spend a couple of minutes explaining what was wrong with this patient. This is the patient's foot, and here is where all his toes should have been. And he has lost all of his toes due to the minor amputation. He is a diabetic, obviously, but was not able to close the wound. And this wound was left open probably for up to 8 months by the time we got in touch with the clinician to try our product. The sort of angry red appearance that you see around the wound is because the wound is constantly infected, simply because it's going to be in the extremity of the foot where you have access to have a large number of dirt and bacteria access the wound. And so this was one of the cases where the product was tried. The second picture is where you basically are debriding the wound and applying the product. The product was cut into strips, and the clinician put a soft cast. The case actually started when, Ken? First week of November? Second week of November. And about a week into the process, or every week into the process, the patient would come back, where all the clinician would do is exchange the external bandages. And this was somebody who was looking at potential amputation. After one application of BioConnect, at about the 7-week time period, we were able to effect about a 75 to 80% closure. And about 15 weeks, this was the last picture that we got a couple of weeks ago from the clinician, we were able to effectively close this wound with just one application of BioConnect. So the product was doing what it was meant to do, especially in the context of a chronic wound. More importantly, it was also able to do this with just one application. And lastly, and perhaps even more impressively, was able to essentially save whatever was left of this poor gentleman's foot from getting amputated below the ankle. So we've got positive feedback, and we've done about roughly about 20 to 25 cases, and we have started to get positive feedback from just about every one of them at this point. The one that I showed you is where we had pictures to track down the course of how it did. What we decided to do next along the way was commit ourselves to basically a prospective study. And the reason for us to committing to a prospective study is simply to validate the clinical performance of our product in the eyes of not just the end users of the product, but also in front of the reimbursement entities. So to that extent, what we did was submit a clinical protocol to do a small series of 20 patients, and our first clinical protocol was approved, and the study is in its recruitment phase as we speak. The first study is actually happening in Florida, and we are hoping that this study will complete somewhere around the June-July time period, meaning all the patients would have completed recruitment in the phase, and then it'll be the follow-up, which should not take too much time after that though. And a second clinical study protocol is already in the works. We have submitted it, and we are waiting to hear back from the appropriate regulatory body in order to get the second study started. So we got the soft launch data coming back looking positive, and we have prospective studies going on forward. What about actual hard commercialization? So, and this is where we are. And this process we started at the beginning of January this year. A couple of things that we did was we already applied for our product-specific reimbursement code with the Center for Medicare Services. CMS is the one that generally gives you a product-specific reimbursement code, and they take in applications only during the January time period of every year, and we should hear back from them shortly. Thanks to the efforts from Ken, we have about 3 distribution networks already signed on with us who are beginning to see commercial product being sent out to appropriate clinicians. We have a commercial presence as of now, mostly in the Southeast, from South Carolina going all the way to Louisiana, and one in the Midwest, Illinois and far west as well though. And the product in principle can be used in the context of both within a hospital as well as in a wound care center, in a doctor's office. And for use of the product within the hospital, we have done our product registration with 3 different hospital networks in the United States already. So we are hoping that this will start to see traction with regards to revenue over the next 4 to 6 month time period. And since our interest was not just within the US but also global, our global efforts also started late last year, especially in countries that reciprocally recognize the US FDA clearance of our product. To that extent, we have a central distribution network set up in the Middle East, which covers about 13 countries. And we are in the process of registering our product with the Ministries of Health in 2 countries in Asia, which we hope to have done. It's a process that takes about 6 months. So by the end of the year, we hope to have a presence in those 2 countries as well, though. So that's where we are right now. Moving forward for 2015 and beyond, this basically captures sort of a few key milestones on what we are hoping to do and see this year. We should hear back from CMS, as I had mentioned, by the April-May time period with regards to the BioConnect specific reimbursement code, which should allow for our product to gain more traction amongst end users. And therein, we are planning to expand the market footprint within the US, which will be a continuous ongoing process. Our interest initially was to limit ourselves to the Southeast, where we had quick and easy control, where we can follow through very effectively with regards to what the advantages and how best our product could be utilized, identifying our key leaders, and then expand into other areas. And the European Union, remember I had mentioned early on that we were in communication with a notified body. We put that regulatory clearance on hold simply because the EU required us to provide us with some human clinical data. Now that we have it, we are reinitiating the process, and we are hoping by the 3rd quarter of this year we should have the product cleared to be marketed in the EU as well, though. And our hope is by the end of the year we will consolidate our worldwide market presence in the countries where we deem our product to have the best clinical value and start to see revenues come in. My sales and marketing guy always says, Chandra, always talk about new products. So we've already started to get feedback from individuals who are using our product with regards to some of the modifications that we need. And as a part of our ability to stay within the BDI as well as we still have an active R&D arm that goes on that still continues to expand our intellectual property presence by coming up with new products. And we have about half a dozen of them in the works as we speak, but we'll wait on regulatory clearance as we move forward. So that sort of is a cliff note summary of the MLM Biologics journey and the BioConnect story over the last 3 years. It was a challenging process, but we are very proud of our accomplishments on what we did over the last 3 years. Basically, we were able to come up with a very good strategy, effectively set milestones, and more importantly, we were able to meet our milestones at every point of the way. It could not have happened but for the hard work of about four guys who basically spend most of our times figuring out what to do and how best to do this. And the second and more important aspect of it that we are extremely proud of is MLM Biologics did all of this without any formal fundraising. So, and we are hoping that by the end of the year we will get to a point where our revenues will start to sustain us. The goal is by the end of the year we would at least be revenue neutral or God willing go revenue positive, and then away we go. So that's a short story of MLM Biologics. I'll be more than happy to answer questions. And yes, sir.
In your comparison with other products, you mentioned that there was a competitor A which performed at least, if not better than yours, but you had an advantage in cost. In more specific terms, what's your cost advantage?
Okay, the cost advantage, I'm going to give you a long-winded answer. It's different within the US and outside the US. Within the US, cost is largely determined by reimbursement. And given the marketplace where we are at, about 75% of the patients who effectively utilize our product end up being Medicare, Medicaid patients. So CMS basically have been changing the way that they reimburse products in our categories over the last 2 to 3 years. To a point right now, they basically are at a stage where they bundle the process, meaning for a surgeon to come, clean the wound, and apply the product, everything is bundled into a code. So, and there are only 2 choices. You can either go to one or the other. So within the US, we really don't have a choice. We'll have to fit into one or the other. So a cost over Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement, which usually most private insurers have started to follow through over the last few years, makes no difference. The cost savings will come when our product is used within the context of an operating room inside a hospital, where the reimbursement is applied differently, where it's called a global code, a DRG code, where the entire procedure for what a patient is going through is lumped under A code, where our product can actually offer about somewhere in the neighborhoods of a 50 to a 75% cost advantage to most commercial products in the setting of a US. If you go outside the US, especially in developing countries, most of the products of the 70 or so that I had listed out there, about 95 to 99% of them simply don't have a play at all. Just the cost of goods alone makes it too expensive. That's where I think we basically will have a much, much bigger play, where because of our technology, because of our high throughput manufacturing, I'll have to throw in a couple of words over there though. We can manufacture basically about 2,000 to 3,000 units of our product on a monthly basis in a room about a quarter the size of this room with just 2 people. So that's how we have sort of efficiently optimized the manufacturing process. So we would be able to leverage that, especially outside the US. That's where I think the true core of the MLM philosophy will begin to come out. So, yeah. Yes?
I'm going to make you do this. Excuse me.
I can hear them, Lee.
But your public needs to be too.
I really like the presentation.
Thank you.
It's inspiring to see a small group of specialists within 3 years launch something that seems to work very well and is hopefully be super successful in the end.
Thank you.
With regards to the toe amputation, you had that time-lapse photo. I've noticed that after removal of the outside bandages, the redness, the irritation went away. Is the BioConnect, is it antiseptic, or did the clinician just use better techniques?
Okay, very perceptive. The redness, I'll address that first though. It is the same clinician. So whatever technique that he has been using has been done throughout the course of the patient not responding to over a course of 7 months and now responding to us. The redness that you see is basically infection. When a product doesn't work and it starts to open up, it's very easy for the exudates to basically be a festering nidus for bacteria to come settle in. The fact that our product does not digest and go away quickly, it also indirectly acts as a way to sort of short circuit some of the inflammatory pathways that contribute to sort of the area being inflamed progressively. Without getting into too much details, I'll tell you this much though. So we have our plans with regards to go and look at it from both a protein and a genetic level with regards to what markers get upregulated and downregulated in the context of a chronic wound where standard of care is done versus our product is done. But we've been starting to get indirect feedback. For example, vasculitic ulcers, they are very painful ulcers. So it's almost like there is a pinprick feeling for the patient constantly. So putting a product in is a challenge. Most of these patients are always on some version of pain meds. In one of the vasculitic patients out in the West Coast where our product was used, within 48 hours, the patient basically asked for pain meds to be removed. So that there was some version of an anti-inflammatory effect that we were able to achieve as well with our product, which we think is partly on how the product interacts with the inflammatory pathway that keeps a chronic wound a chronic wound. On how our product works, we were able to actually get very explicit data from our animal studies. Our product basically incorporates with the wound. What it does is it serves as a scaffold in the void where you have put it in. It allows for the host cells themselves to come in. And most times when a clinician debrides a wound, all he is doing is creating a nice bleeding wound bed. So temporarily he has converted this chronic wound into an acute wound. The idea is if you can have a product that can keep this acute wound in its stage for a period of time where healing can now jumpstart, that's basically what our product is doing. And our product incorporates with the wound. In animal studies, we know by about the 4 to 6 week time period, our product is entirely resorbed and gone, as opposed to most products which will usually go away in about 2 to 3 days, which is why you have to do the repeat applications. We minimize that. So that's how our product works. Yes?
I have 2 questions. The
Sure.
first one is really short. Why equine collagen? Because industry is dominated with bovine and porcine sources.
Mm-hmm.
And my second question is why did you strategize with a soft launch in US first when you have the FDA approval? Was the limitation, was the scale up that you may not have product or you wanted to see how it is in the extreme cases?
Mm-hmm. Okay. First question, why equine collagen as opposed to bovine or porcine, which are more commonly present? The more technical answer would be type 1 collagen is very similar across species. If you take equine collagen, bovine collagen, or collagen from pigs, and you do an amino acid sequence, protein sequence, they basically are about 95 to 97% identical. The reason for us to go equine is as good as processing steps are these days, mad cow disease is still a sort of a barrier that one will have to cross, both from end users' point of view as well as from regulatory bodies that will approve the product to be used. This is particularly true in Europe, and if you start to go to the Far East, it becomes a problem as well, though. You can get bovine sources from countries that don't have mad cow disease ever, Australia, New Zealand, a few countries like that. Those are harder to come by, and the raw material becomes awfully expensive. Our reason to go with equine is in my previous life, I had already worked with equine collagen, so I was comfortable with what it was capable of doing. We had a source who basically had been in the business for about 20 some years, and so it was just an easy transition for us to go the equine source. We were working with a bovine source, but decided to go with the equine source because it was more a reproducible material from the point of view of a vendor providing us that material. So that's the reason to go equine. Soft launch in the US, largely we wanted to control what we were going to see, how well our product was going to be used. Because the products can be used any number of ways. We designed the product to be fairly intuitively easy for a clinician to use it. Actually, outside the US, we've already gotten feedback that about 70 to 80% of the times our product is not going to be used by a clinician but by the nursing staff who are going to use the product. So we had that in mind as we developed the product to make it intuitively easy, but still at the end of the day, there are going to be specific ways that you will have to use the product, on how the product has to be managed. For example, our product need not be removed from the wound. It's very difficult to instill that into sort of end users. Oftentimes, even within the US, in South Florida, we've had at least during one of our soft launches, the patient basically go and remove the product every day, and the clinician was basically coming back and putting in a new product. So we picked places where we knew the clinicians, we knew that the patients going to see them were compliant patients, and so this way we can actually get a fair assessment of what the value of our product is from a clinical perspective. That's the reason for us to go within the US for our soft launch. Okay? Yes?
Is there any reason with the results that you have, and I know that you're concentrating on those sort of long-term chronic wound care patients, but is there any reason this wouldn't be adopted as the standard of care by surgeons in having better outcomes with closing of incisions and long-term outcomes with other patients? And do you see that as part of your expansion? Is there any reason that wouldn't be the case?
No, you're absolutely right. Our product, if you go through our indications list, is actually indicated to be used in instances of surgical incision, laser surgeries, or incisions, or like a melanoma incision where you have removed a larger piece of skin. So our product is indicated to be used in those instances as well. The medical device business is in some sense largely dictated by call patterns. Okay, so the guy who is doing surgeries, so the call pattern in visiting a general surgeon is very different than attending somebody who is doing foot and ankle surgeries, then very different from somebody who is doing chronic wounds. So where we are starting our entry is in areas where it was still reasonably fresh in our memory, so you could actually go approach the end users with little resistance with regards to what the value proposition is. But you are absolutely right. Our long-term goal is basically to have the product to be used in a variety of other conditions. One example quickly that comes to mind is in one of the larger Asian countries where we are working through our regulatory clearance process, we were clearly told at the very front end that preventive diabetic foot ulcer care is not a big market here. Our bigger market is in trauma and burns. So, and that's where we want to use the product. So that's going to be our initial market presence out there. So we basically are adapting to what the needs are. Within the US, generally, it's a question of, given that there are about 100 products, it's challenging to find a situation where you can sort of start to differentiate yourselves and then move into the mainstream. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. So would this replace the kind of traditional and long-term wound care of packing and wrapping and then cleaning and packing? And if so, you would basically apply this one time and just change the exterior dressing on that sort of thing?
Yes. With our soft launch at this point, that's what we have seen. The foot ulcer amputation case that I've shown, it was one application of our product, and I take that back. Actually, on the very where his pinky toe would have been, he still had a small open wound that looked like it might have a little bit of a cavitation, where the clinician went back, I think at about the 9 or 10 week time period, and put a second small product in there though. But in principle, for average sized wounds, that's what we are anticipating as how the product is going to be used is one application, you just go back and you keep changing the secondary dressing after that, and leave the product alone and allow the wound to heal.
So what happens if the wound has MRSA?
That has to be treated separately. The product is not an antimicrobial product. Okay? Generally, if you have MRSA or if you are known to have MRSA, a clinician will not do any kind of a clinical procedure on you unless he or she has been cleared of the MRSA or any infection for that matter. Our product, in our indications for use, we clearly state that if you see active infections, do not use the product, first take care of the infection. On the foot ulcer case that I had shown where there was redness, it's because there was infection. The patient actually had a PICC line, and he was on intravenous antibiotics, and the day that our product got applied was the last day of his IV antibiotics when we applied the product. So the product has nothing to do with eliminating bacteria. What the product does is it is capable of working if there is a small level of secondary infection, which becomes an important part, especially in foot ulcers or chronic wounds, because most of the bacteria that occupy the skin, they spread by making sort of the same enzymes that opens up a wound. And our product, by being able to resist that, actually gives the body a better chance to go back and help the wound close. So it doesn't do anything to the bacteria, it's just that it resists the bacteria a lot better than most products. Some of the more expensive cell therapy products in the marketplace today, for example, the efficacy of the products would drop off dramatically with very small bacterial loads in the wound. And there are studies that people have done where you can actually go and see how much bacteria is present in the wound on the day you're applying the product and what if it increases. So ours would give those a better chance as well. This becomes much more important, especially in developing countries. Over here, the standard of care, the compliance of patients, by and large, is reasonably good. In areas where it's somebody's lifestyle to basically have to go and work, a product like ours would actually give a much better chance by being robust and being able to handle some of the insults that you would see in a chronic wound setting. Okay? One second.
Yes, I have a friend who's diabetic, very severe diabetic, and had back surgery. She's got a wound about, an incision about 8 inches long on her back. She's been taking hyperbaric treatments
Oxygen.
for it, and it's not working. She's just having a terrible time. Is this something that
Sure. Our product is indicated to be used in that particular instance, and is your friend going through this here in Gainesville or else? Okay. So is she going to the hyperbaric center at North Florida or at Shands?
I'm not sure. All I know is it's $20,000 a pop.
So both Ken and I can follow up. We'll be happy to see how best we can help you and your friend. So we'll be more than happy to do that.
What about scarring?
Scarring. Interesting topic. Somebody who always told me, so you'll always run out of money before you run out of ideas. So, which is very important for startup companies. So we actually have some fairly interesting data on scarring, but we are leveraging that data as it applies to chronic wounds initially, and we'll move on to more cosmetic surgeries later on. In the animal studies that we did, basically when wounds heal, they contract. And so there is some level of deformation as the wound heals on how the actual eventual healed surface is going to look like. What we see is because of the way we have modified our product, wounds generally heal with minimal contraction. So which is a preferred feature. We've actually been approached by a couple of plastic surgeons who thought that this would be a value proposition in cosmetic surgeries. That becomes an entirely different regulatory pathway as far as getting clearance to be used in those indications. So we will get to that point eventually. But in chronic wounds, for example, in people who have had minor amputations or even major amputations and the amputation site opens, these folks generally have some level of prosthetics that they put on. And if the wound hasn't healed with enough scar tissue, robustness, it tends to reopen. We think because of the way our product works, it will probably allow for those scars to reopen less frequently. But we will have to follow through on a few of them before we find that out. So for the time being, we are concentrating on how to assess the value of scar tissue that is formed with our product in the context of a chronic wound setting. We'll probably move on to the more it's a dream for most people because that's a much well-reimbursed market space, the aesthetic market space. We'll get to there slowly. Yes?
From what you said, it seemed like there's a very short lead time, and also the your production facility is not that extensive. So I was just wondering what your barriers to entry would be for competition, or is that not a concern? There's enough space.
Two answers to your question. With regards to the lead time, it largely goes to the team that we have. We've all been sort of in the medical device space, so we kind of know the key barrier for a medical device product to move from the benchtop to actual clinical use is the regulatory barrier. And figuring out what you need to do, how you present the data so that you can actually get the regulatory clearance quickly back, that becomes one of the key barriers. And for that, it's who you have on your team and how well you're able to assess, analyze, and present the data to the regulatory folks. And this entails basically engaging them fairly early on in the process. Since our team, I have personally gone through at least several of products cleared by the FDA in this pathway. So I was aware of what needs to be done, and we have a regulatory person full-time with us who basically does this on a full-time basis. So knowing the space basically is one big barrier that we were able to shorten simply because of our experience in that area. With regards to setting up manufacturing and moving forward, again, it's primarily our experience in that area. So we've been doing this, I have been doing this since about 2000, and our manufacturing guys, if I combine the two of them, they've been doing it for a sum total of probably about 40 to 50 years. So we knew what would be our bottlenecks, where we needed to have sort of redundant steps to make sure that we are appropriately quality controlling. And mostly it's presenting the data to a regulatory body saying that this is how we start, this is how we finish, here are the steps, here is how we control it at each point, and if things go wrong, here is how quickly we will be able to detect them and fix the problem so that you're not sending out a defective product at the end of the day. So that knowledge certainly was helpful in us basically compressing our time frame, number one. The barrier with regards to marketing the product within the US, I would say is largely dictated by reimbursement. In the current day status, it's largely reimbursement, and that's a process. It is evolving simply because CMS is changing guidelines, and it will also evolve with regards to what kinds of information they are looking for before they would allow you to reimburse allow your product to be reimbursed. So it's a combination.
Like overseas, are you not concerned about people doing reverse engineering basically?
Sure, I would love for them to try it out though. So actually, I don't mean to belittle your question, but I say this from the point of view that having been in this area where we've done due diligence not just for technologies that we had developed in my previous lives, as well as assessing competitive technology, usually the most difficult one to reverse engineer is the most simple one. So you always sit down and think, oh my God, is it this simple? How did I not realize that you could do this? So I think we are at a space right now where, yes, somebody eventually would be able to reverse engineer what we have, but I think the two barriers would be the amount of time it would take for somebody to do that, and second and more importantly, we spend a lot of time in sort of optimizing the technology. So even though somebody can reverse engineer, I don't think people would be able to compete with us on a cost basis on how to get to that endpoint. So with both of those, I think we feel fairly comfortable with where we are. So.
Any more questions? Chandra, that was
No, yeah. Thank you, folks, and Thank you.